Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work as a delivery driver for a local florist shop, and that day started like any other day. I had just finished delivering a bouquet to a retirement home and was heading back to the shop to grab my next order. The lunch rush was always busy, and I knew my boss would have at least 4 more deliveries waiting for me. I was stopped at a four-way intersection waiting for traffic to clear so I could make my left turn. That's when I saw her. This woman came sprinting across the street from the corner, waving her arms and yelling something I couldn't quite make out. She looked maybe 40 years old, wearing a stained tank top and jeans that had seen better days. Her hair was messy like she'd been running for a while, and she had that jittery energy that made me immediately uncomfortable. Before I could even process what was happening, she was at my passenger door. She yelled that she needed to get home right now and that I was going to give her a ride. She didn't ask. She didn't wait for me to respond. She literally swung her leg over the door of my convertible and dropped herself into the passenger seat like she owned the place. I sat there with my mouth hanging open, completely stunned by what had just happened. She told me she would give me $5 for gas and demanded I take her to the housing project on Maple Street. I knew exactly where she meant. The public housing complex was about a mile and a half from where we were sitting. It wasn't the nicest part of town, but it wasn't dangerous during the day either. I looked at this woman who had just hijacked my car and tried to figure out what to do next. I told her she couldn't just jump into someone's car like that. She said she didn't have time for this nonsense because her kid was sick and she needed to get home. She told me to just drive. She wasn't looking at me when she spoke. Her eyes kept darting around like she was watching for something or someone. She kept bouncing her leg and picking at her fingernails. The whole situation felt surreal. Here I was, sitting at a stop sign with a complete stranger in my passenger seat demanding I drive her home. I thought about my options. I could try to physically remove her from my car, but she looked like she might put up a fight and we were in the middle of a busy intersection. I could call the police, but that would take time and who knows what she might do while we waited. I could get out and walk away, but then she'd be left with my car. The truth is, I was scared. Not terrified, but definitely uneasy. She seemed more desperate than dangerous, but you never know. I remembered reading somewhere that if someone tries to carjack you, the best thing to do is crash into something rather than let them take you to a second location. At least if we crashed, there would be witnesses and help nearby. So I made what was probably a stupid decision. I decided it would be easier to just drive her where she wanted to go rather than escalate the situation. It was broad daylight, the housing project had people around, and honestly, I just wanted her out of my car as quickly as possible. The drive took about 10 minutes. She didn't say another word the entire time. She just sat there bouncing her leg and staring out the windshield. I kept looking over at her, trying to figure out if she was planning something, but she seemed completely lost in her own world. When we pulled up to the main entrance of the housing complex, she hopped out immediately. She said thanks and that was it. No $5, no real gratitude. She just ran off toward one of the buildings without looking back. But here's what really got me mad. She left my passenger door hanging wide open. Not just cracked open, but fully extended as far as it would go. I sat there for a second, processing what had just happened. Then I got out to walk around and close the door myself. That's when this older guy in a silver pickup truck pulled up next to me and rolled down his window. He asked if I knew that woman and if I was okay. I told him I had no idea who she was, but that I was fine. He explained that he had been driving behind me when he saw her jump into my car. He said he had followed me here to make sure nothing bad was going down. This complete stranger had been watching out for me the entire time. He had seen what happened and decided to follow us just to make sure I was safe. I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude mixed with embarrassment that I had needed looking after in the first place. I thanked him and told him how thoughtful that was. He looked at me with this expression that reminded me of my dad when I was about to get lectured for doing something stupid. He said he would have punched that woman right out of his truck. if it had been him. Then he pointed his finger right at me like I was his own kid getting scolded and told me to never do that again. He was absolutely right. I had made a dangerous decision that could have ended much worse than it did. I agreed with him and admitted I didn't know what I had been thinking. He shook his head and said that woman had some serious nerve jumping into my car like that. He pointed out that she was lucky nothing bad had happened, because what if she had tried that with the wrong person? What if I had been someone dangerous? After he drove away, I sat in my car for a few more minutes thinking about the whole situation. The audacity of that woman was incredible. Who just jumps into a stranger's car and demands a ride? The entitlement was mind-blowing. She acted like I owed her transportation just because she needed it. But that guy who followed me restored my faith in people a little bit. He didn't know me from anyone, but he saw someone potentially in trouble and decided to help. He could have just minded his own business and kept driving, but instead, he took time out of his day to make sure I was safe. I finally drove back to the flower shop, where my boss was waiting with a stack of delivery orders and a lot of questions about why I'd been gone so long. I told him the story, and he just shook his head and said people have lost their minds. He told me I was lucky she wasn't dangerous. The rest of the day went normally, but I kept thinking about what had happened. I kept my top up for the rest of the week, and I've been much more aware of my surroundings ever since. I also started carrying pepper spray in my glove compartment. I'm 15 and I've been through more living situations than most adults. My mom passed away when I was 12, and my dad wasn't in a position to take care of me at the time, so I ended up with a legal guardian named Sam. She's only 26, so it wasn't like having a traditional parent figure, but it worked for a while. Sam is a writer, and she always made sure everyone knew it. She'd constantly talk about her manuscripts, her publishing dreams, and how she was going to be the next big thing in fiction. Honestly, I didn't mind it much. Everyone needs their dreams, right? But living with Sam had its challenges. She was immature in a lot of ways, and her girlfriend was even worse. The girlfriend was 23 but acted like she was still in high school, always starting drama and being hostile about everything. Things got rocky between us over the past year. Sam made some decisions about my care that my dad and I didn't agree with, and eventually, my dad got back on his feet and was able to take me in. The whole guardianship thing was in the process of being legally transferred back to him. When I moved out a few months ago, Sam packed all my stuff in trash bags, which should have been my first red flag about how this was going to go. The problem was, she kept my school-issued Chromebook. This wasn't some personal laptop, it was property of the school district that I needed for all my classes. Sam had borrowed it at one point to send me a file of her book manuscript, some editor's copy she was working on. She said she wanted me to read it and give her feedback, which I never really got around to doing. School was starting the next day, and I absolutely needed that Chromebook. Every assignment, every online textbook, everything was going to be on there. Without it, I'd be completely screwed from day one of the semester. 5 days before school started, I went to Sam's place to pick it up. The Chromebook was dead when I got there. Sam told me the battery was completely drained and she would charge it up and delete her book file so I could have it back before school started. I told her I really needed it by the next night at the latest and asked her to make sure it was ready. She said it wouldn't be a problem and that she'd take care of it. Days passed and I heard nothing. No text, no call, no update. The night before school, I was freaking out. My dad and I had to go pick up my little sister's stuff from Sam's place anyway, so I figured I'd just grab the Chromebook then. When we got there, Sam wasn't even home, just her girlfriend, who immediately got this attitude the moment she saw me. I told her I was there for my Chromebook because school started tomorrow and I really needed it. She flat out told me I wasn't getting it. I asked what she meant since it was mine and it was school property. She explained there was stuff on there that belonged to Sam, and they weren't giving it back until it was deleted properly. She said I wouldn't have it for the first day of school, and that this was a boundary they were setting. The way she said boundary made it clear this was some kind of power play. She was standing there with her arms crossed, acting like she owned my school-issued device. I offered to delete whatever file was on there right then and there, in front of her, but I said I needed the Chromebook that night. She refused and said Sam needed to be the one to handle it, and Sam wasn't there. I asked her to call Sam then, saying this was ridiculous. She claimed Sam was busy and that I should have called her directly instead of just showing up. I could tell this wasn't going anywhere productive. The girlfriend was being hostile, and I honestly didn't feel safe with her having this much control over something that wasn't even hers to begin with. This was a school device that I was responsible for, and she was basically holding it hostage over a file that I never even asked to have on there. I stepped outside and called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation, that my former guardian was refusing to return school property that I needed for classes starting the next day, and that I just wanted to resolve it peacefully with an officer present. While I was on the phone, Sam started calling me repeatedly. She asked what I was doing and why I was involving the police. I explained that her girlfriend was being unreasonable, and I needed my Chromebook for school tomorrow. She told me to just give her girlfriend my password and login information so she could delete the file herself. I absolutely refused. I told her I wasn't giving anyone else control over my school account. I said I could delete whatever needed to be deleted right in front of both of them, or we could wait for the police officer to help sort this out, but I wasn't handing over my passwords. She said this was so unnecessary and that I was making such a big deal out of nothing. I told her the big deal was that tomorrow was the first day of school and I didn't have the device I needed because they were being weird about a file I never asked for in the first place. When the officer arrived, he was really professional and calm about the whole thing. He listened to both sides and quickly understood that this was a pretty straightforward situation. I needed school property returned and they wanted the file deleted. The officer said this seemed like something they could resolve pretty easily and asked if Sam could just delete the file in question so I could have my school device back. Sam had apparently rushed home during all of this. She showed up looking flustered and annoyed. She agreed to delete the file herself. She opened the Chromebook, found her book file, and deleted it right there in front of me and the officer. The whole thing took about 30 seconds. The officer said, "There we go, problem solved." I thanked the officer and left with my Chromebook. The entire situation could have been resolved in 5 minutes if they had just been reasonable from the start. But instead, they turned it into this whole dramatic production. Later that evening, I started getting texts from Sam. She said she couldn't believe I called the police on them and claimed she was in the middle of assisting with a surgery at work when I forced her to leave. I told her I was confused about why she was upset, that I tried to reach her since she had told me to call her directly, and that I had given her 5 days to handle this before involving anyone else. She complained that I made them look like criminals in front of their neighbors. I explained that I'd call the non-emergency line and asked for help resolving a civil dispute, and that the officer was completely professional and calm about it. But Sam wasn't done. Over the next few days, she and her girlfriend started making vague posts on social media about karma and how some people don't know how to handle conflict appropriately. They were clearly trying to make me look like the bad guy for not just accepting their unreasonable demands. The thing that really got to me was how they tried to frame this like I was some kind of ungrateful kid causing trouble. I have been nothing but polite and patient throughout this whole process. I gave them multiple opportunities to just return my school property without any drama. All I wanted was to be prepared for my first day of school. I've been working the emergency room shift for 2 weeks straight because my colleague was out sick. The emergency room was busier than usual that night. We had a car accident victim in critical condition, an elderly man having chest pains, and several other serious cases that needed immediate attention. The medical staff was running around trying to prioritize patients based on the severity of their conditions. Around 7 in the evening, this woman walked in with what looked like a 6-year-old girl. The little one had a small bandage on her knee and seemed perfectly fine, chatting away and walking normally. The woman walked straight to the front desk like she owned the place. The woman demanded that someone see her sister right away because she had fallen off her bike and hurt her knee. The triage nurse, who I'd worked with many times and knew to be incredibly patient and professional, looked up from her paperwork and told the woman she would need to assess the injury first. She asked what had happened to the little girl. The woman explained that her sister had been sitting on her bike in their driveway when she lost her balance and scraped her knee on the concrete. The nurse gently examined the little girl's knee. It was barely a scratch, the kind of thing most parents would handle with a kiss and a cartoon bandage at home. The nurse explained that she could see it was just a minor scrape, and they would definitely get her cleaned up, but they currently had several critical patients who needed immediate attention. She told them that emergency rooms work on a priority system based on how serious the injuries are. That's when things went completely off the rails. The woman asked angrily if the nurse was telling her that her sister wasn't important enough. She said that the little girl was in pain and scared. The nurse said she understood her concern but explained that they had people there whose lives were in danger. She pointed out that while a small scrape was surely uncomfortable, it wasn't life-threatening, and they would see the girl when they could. The woman started raising her voice. She complained that the whole situation was ridiculous and claimed they had been there first before some of the other people. That wasn't even true. I'd watched several ambulances arrive after she came in, but there were definitely patients who'd been waiting longer with more serious conditions. The nurse tried to explain again how triage works, but the woman wasn't having it. She stormed away from the desk and started pacing around the waiting area, getting more agitated by the minute. Every time another patient was called back before her sister, she got angrier. Then an ambulance pulled up with its lights flashing. I could see through the glass doors that they were bringing someone in on a stretcher. The woman saw it too, and something in her just snapped. She positioned herself right in front of the automatic doors leading into the emergency room. She announced loudly that nobody else was coming in until her sister got treated. The paramedics were trying to wheel the patient in, but she was blocking their path. They told her they had a critical patient and asked her to please move aside. The woman refused and said that every time more people came in, it meant they had to wait longer. She declared she wasn't moving until someone saw her sister. I immediately called for backup and started walking toward the situation. The lead nurse, who'd been dealing with the critical cases, came out to see what the commotion was about. She told the woman that she needed to step away from the entrance immediately because she was preventing emergency medical care. The woman said she didn't care and repeated that her sister was hurt too. The paramedics were getting desperate. Their patient was clearly in bad shape and needed immediate attention. The lead nurse tried to reason with her, explaining that her sister had a minor scratch while this person could die without immediate treatment. She begged the woman to please be reasonable, but she wasn't reasonable at all. When the lead nurse tried to gently guide her away from the doors, the woman shoved her hard. The nurse stumbled backward and fell to the floor. Another nurse rushed to help her colleague, but the woman shoved her too, sending her tumbling into a chair. That's when I stepped in with my backup. I told the woman she was under arrest for assault and that she needed to come with us immediately. She protested that we couldn't arrest her and claimed she was just trying to get help for her sister. She tried to resist, but we managed to restrain her safely. The little girl was crying now, not because of her scratch, but because she was scared and confused about what her sister was doing. While we were detaining the woman, the paramedics finally got their critical patient inside. The nurses she'd pushed were okay, just shaken up, and they immediately went back to doing their jobs like the professionals they are. We held the woman in our security office until the police arrived about 20 minutes later. She kept screaming about how unfair everything was and how she was going to sue everyone. When the police officer arrived, he told her that she was being charged with assault, disorderly conduct, and interfering with emergency medical services. The woman said the whole thing was insane and that all she wanted was for someone to look at her sister's knee. The officer asked her if blocking an emergency room entrance and assaulting medical staff was really her solution to that problem. The officers took her away in handcuffs while social services was called to take care of the little girl. Before they left, one of the nurses cleaned and bandaged the child's knee properly, gave her a lollipop, and made sure she was okay. Later that evening, I found out that the patient the paramedics had brought in during all the chaos had suffered a heart attack. Thanks to the delay caused by the woman blocking the entrance, his condition had worsened significantly. He survived, but he'll need much more extensive treatment now because of those crucial minutes lost. The woman was banned from the hospital grounds and ended up facing serious criminal charges, all because she couldn't understand that a tiny scratch doesn't take priority over someone's life hanging in the balance. 2 years ago, I was fresh out of high school and desperately needed a job. My parents had been on my case about contributing to the household or moving out, and I wasn't ready for college yet. I applied everywhere I could think of, but the job market was tough. Fast food places wanted experience I didn't have, retail stores weren't hiring, and even the grocery stores had waiting lists. Then I saw an ad for a dishwasher position at a small bakery downtown. I walked in one morning and the owner hired me on the spot. She seemed nice enough at first, explaining that I'd be washing dishes, doing some light cleaning, and helping keep the place sanitized. Simple enough, right? The bakery was one of those places that tried to look fancy but was really just overpriced. They sold artisan breads and pastries to people who wanted to feel sophisticated about their breakfast choices. The owner was this woman in her 40s who always wore perfectly pressed aprons and had this fake smile plastered on her face whenever customers were around. At first, everything seemed fine. I'd come in early, wash the dishes from the previous day, mop the floors, and clean the counters. The work was boring but easy, and I figured I could stick it out until I found something better. The other employees were nice enough, mostly part-time college students who worked the front counter. But after a few weeks, I started noticing things. The owner had this way of talking to the staff that made my skin crawl. She'd smile sweetly while saying the most condescending things, like she was doing us some huge favor by letting us work there. And she had this habit of changing her mind constantly about how she wanted things done. One week, she'd want the floors mopped with one type of cleaner. The next week, she'd complain that we were using the wrong stuff. She'd ask us to reorganize the supply closet, then get mad when she couldn't find anything. It was like working for someone who had never actually worked a day in her life, but thought she knew everything about running a business. The breaking point came on a busy Saturday morning. I was in the back washing dishes when I heard a crash from the prep area. One of the bakers had accidentally knocked over a container of raspberry filling, and it had splattered everywhere. The stuff was bright red and sticky, covering the wall underneath the hand washing station like some kind of crime scene. The owner came rushing over when she heard the commotion. She asked what had happened, and the baker apologized, explaining that he had bumped into the cart and the filling went everywhere. He offered to clean it up himself, but the owner refused. She pointed at me and told me that cleaning was what I was paid for. She ordered me to scrape off all the excess filling and sanitize the whole area. So I grabbed my cleaning supplies and got to work. The raspberry filling was incredibly sticky and had already started to set. I scraped off as much as I could with a plastic scraper, then used sanitizer to clean the surface. But even after all that scrubbing, there was still a pink stain on the white paint. The owner came back to inspect my work 20 minutes later. She asked about the stain that was still visible on the wall. I explained that it was from the raspberry filling and that I had gotten all the actual filling off, but it had stained the paint. I told her that if I scrubbed any harder, I would take the paint right off the wall, and I thought the stain had probably gone through to the wall underneath too. She looked at me like I had just told her the most ridiculous thing in the world. She said she didn't care about the paint, and that she cared about having a clean workspace. She told me to scrub harder. I tried to explain again that scrubbing harder would damage the wall, but she just repeated her order to scrub harder. I stared at her for a moment, trying to figure out if she was serious. She was, so I did exactly what she asked. I scrubbed that wall like my life depended on it. I used steel wool, heavy-duty cleaners, everything I could think of. The paint started coming off in chunks, revealing the stained drywall underneath. The raspberry filling had soaked right through the paint and into the wall itself, leaving an even more obvious pink mark. I kept scrubbing anyway. If she wanted me to scrub harder, I was going to scrub until there was nothing left to scrub. The paint peeled off in long strips, and I could see the wall getting more and more damaged with every stroke. After another 30 minutes of aggressive scrubbing, the owner came back to check on my progress. Her face went completely pale when she saw what I'd done. She asked me what I had done to her wall. I told her that I had scrubbed harder, exactly like she had told me to do. She said she hadn't told me to destroy the paint, but I reminded her that she actually had. I explained that I had told her that scrubbing harder would damage the paint, and she had said to do it anyway. She insisted that I should have used common sense, but I pointed out that I had used common sense. I had told her what would happen, and she had insisted I do it anyway. She started getting red in the face, that fake customer service smile completely gone. She complained that this was going to cost hundreds of dollars to fix and said she couldn't believe I would be so careless. That's when I finally lost it. I told her that careless wasn't the right word. I had warned her exactly what would happen. I had told her the filling had stained the paint and that scrubbing harder would take the paint off. She had looked me in the eye and told me to do it anyway. This was exactly what she had asked for. She then threatened to dock my pay to cover the damage, but I told her she wasn't going to do that because I quit. I took off my apron and threw it on the floor next to the pile of paint chips. I told her good luck explaining to her customers why there was a giant pink stain, an exposed drywall in her so-called artisan bakery. I walked out that day and never looked back. My roommate and I had been living together for about 8 months when this whole thing went down. We both enjoyed smoking and had bonded over our shared interest when we first met through a mutual friend who was helping me find someone to split rent with. The guy seemed cool enough. He was studying business, had a part-time job at a local pizza place, and promised he was clean and responsible. For the most part, he was, except for one annoying habit. When we first moved in together, I made it clear that I was happy to share my stash whenever he wanted some. I told him multiple times that all he had to do was ask, and I'd gladly let him smoke with me or take some when I wasn't around. It seemed like a reasonable arrangement between two adults. But here's the thing, he never asked. Not once. I come home from class or work and noticed my bag was lighter than when I left. It wasn't huge amounts, maybe enough for 1 or 2 sessions. But it was still my stuff disappearing without any acknowledgement. At first, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he forgot to ask. Maybe he was planning to mention it later. But weeks turned into months, and it kept happening. The worst part wasn't even the missing product. It was the principle. I had explicitly told him to just ask, and he couldn't even do that basic courtesy. It felt disrespectful, like he thought I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care enough to say anything. And honestly, part of me didn't want to make a big deal about it, because confrontation isn't really my style. But another part of me was getting increasingly annoyed every time I discovered he'd helped himself again. I started thinking about ways to address it without creating drama in our living situation. Direct confrontation seemed like it might make things weird between us, and I still had 6 months left on the lease. That's when the perfect opportunity presented itself. I was planning a month-long trip back home to visit family during winter break. My parents had been bugging me to come stay for an extended visit, and I figured it would be a good chance to save money on rent and get some home cooking. The night before I left, I was packing and getting my room organized when I had a brilliant idea. I have 2 cats, and anyone who's owned cats knows they go absolutely crazy for catnip. I had just bought a fresh bag of the stuff for them, and putting it away, I noticed how similar it looked to the real thing when it was all ground up in a little plastic baggie. That's when the plan formed in my head. I took a small amount of the catnip and put it in one of my usual storage bags. Then I strategically placed it on my desk right next to my bong, which still had an old bowl piece in it that I never used anymore, and my rolling tray. To anyone taking a casual look, it would look exactly like my normal setup. I made sure the bag was positioned prominently enough that he'd definitely notice it if he came into my room. Before leaving, I moved all my actual stash to a completely different hiding spot and double-checked that the catnip bag was the only thing visible on my desk. It felt a little devious, but I figured if he was going to keep taking my stuff without asking, he might as well learn a lesson in the process. The trip home was great. I spent time with family, caught up with old friends, and honestly didn't think much about what was happening back at the apartment. It wasn't until I was on the plane home that I started wondering if my little experiment had worked. When I got back to the apartment, I immediately went to check my room. Sure enough, the catnip bag was significantly lighter than when I'd left it. I had to suppress a laugh realizing my plan had actually worked. I unpacked my stuff and waited for him to come home from work. About an hour later, I heard him come through the front door. He knocked on my room door and poked his head in with a big smile. He greeted me enthusiastically and asked how the trip went, wanting to know if I had a good time with my family. I told him it was awesome and really relaxing, and that I got to eat way too much of my mom's cooking. He said that was great and mentioned that he missed having me around because the place was way too quiet without me. I was sitting at my desk, and I casually picked up the nearly empty catnip bag, holding it up so he could see it clearly. I pointed out that I could see he had found my stash while I was gone. His whole demeanor changed instantly. The smile faded from his face, and he got that look people get when they've been caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing. He shifted uncomfortably in the doorway and started apologizing, saying he knew he should have asked first. He explained that he was just hanging out in my room one night and saw it and thought maybe just a little bit wouldn't hurt. He promised he was going to replace it before I got back, but said he'd been broke all week. I asked him how much he had smoked. He swore it wasn't that much, maybe 3 or 4 times over the whole month, and kept apologizing. Then I asked him if he had enjoyed it. He looked confused by the question, probably wondering why I seemed so calm about the whole thing. He admitted that it was pretty good stuff, maybe not stronger than my usual, but it did the job. I told him I was glad he enjoyed the catnip. He asked what I meant, clearly not understanding. I explained that the bag was full of catnip, the stuff I give to my cats to make them go crazy. It went from confusion to disbelief to horror in about 3 seconds. He insisted I was messing with him. I told him I wasn't and held the bag out for him to smell. He took a tentative sniff, then his eyes went wide. He took a deeper smell. He realized in shock that it smelled exactly like cat treats. He started laughing, but it was that nervous kind of laughter you do when you realize you've done something really stupid. He said he couldn't believe he had been smoking catnip for a whole month and asked how he hadn't noticed. I explained that it was probably because he was expecting it to be something else, so his brain filled in the blanks. He was still laughing and shaking his head, saying how embarrassing it was. He even admitted that he had been telling his friends about my good stuff, which made me laugh too. The mental image of him bragging to people about the quality of literal cat treats was too much. I joked that now he knew why my cats were always so chill. But then his laughter started to slow down, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was realizing that I had set this up intentionally. He asked if I had left it there on purpose. I confirmed that I had. He said that was kind of messed up and that I had set him up. I had been waiting for this moment, and I was ready with my response. I told him that there was one simple thing that would have prevented this whole situation if he had just asked me before taking it, like I had told him to do literally every time we had talked about sharing. He opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it again. I could see him thinking through all the times he'd helped himself to my stuff over the past few months. He admitted that I had a point. I explained that if he had sent me a text asking if he could smoke some of my stash while I was gone, I would have told him not to touch that bag because it was catnip. But since he never asked, he ended up getting high off cat treats for a month. He ran his hands through his hair and let out a long sigh, agreeing that he got it and that he should have been asking all along. He admitted that what he had been doing was wrong. I clarified that I wasn't mad about sharing and never had been. I just wanted him to ask first because it was basic respect. He said I was absolutely right and apologized, explaining that he didn't know why he kept doing that. He figured since I said he could have some, it was always okay. I pointed out that there was a difference between saying someone can have some and telling them to help themselves whenever they want. He said he could see that now and started laughing again. He said he couldn't believe he had been smoking catnip and mentioned that his throat did feel kinda scratchy sometimes, but he thought it was just dry stuff. I joked that my cats certainly appreciated good quality product. He realized this was going to be one of those stories he'd never live down. I agreed it probably wouldn't be. He laughed and shook his head again, and promised that from now on, he would ask before taking anything and would definitely smell test everything first. I told him that was probably a good policy in general. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.